Good evening and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. May I ask you to stand, please, for the national anthem, which will be led by Major Alfred Taylor, and I invite you all to join in lustily singing of our beautiful anthem. Major Taylor. Thank you, Major Taylor. Thank you very much indeed. You may be seated. I have to tell you that anytime I'm invited to be a master of ceremonies, I always insist on knowing if the anthem is going to be played, and if it is, then it must be sung, and the words must be provided with the program for all those who have never learnt them. And I confess that at my great age, on this occasion, not having been an MC for a year or two, I completely forgot to ask. So there are no words on the back of your program, and it was only this evening, this afternoon, that I discovered we were going to have the anthem, and Major Taylor, as a piece of good luck and good fortune, Major Taylor was pointed out by a very shy member of the choir of St. George's Church as a much better singer than him. And so Major Taylor, who is a member of the choir of St. Michael's Cathedral, did us the honor in leading the anthem. My wife instructed me that I should not, and she, of course, was right. I would now like to call on Carol Pitt, the publisher of this wonderful book, Notes of a Native Governor-General. I'd like to call on Carol to give the opening remarks. Carol?
The Honourable Mr. Justice Cheltenham, the Honourable John King, MP, Minister of Culture and National Development, Mr. Reginald Farley, Mr. Frendell Stewart, Dr. the Most Honourable Anthony Gabby Carter, I almost said mighty, His Excellency Stedson Wiltshire, the Honourable Mr. Justice William Chandler, retired principal, former senator, and the author of this lovely book, Mr. Adams, the Honorable Ralph Thorne, MP, and ladies and gentlemen. I just wish to open these proceedings with two brief matters. The first one is to welcome you, and apart from myself, I think I can speak on behalf of the author, Mr. Alwin Adams, when I say that it is great to see all of you. We're happy to have you here to celebrate this new addition to the Barbadian literary landscape, especially during these trying times, this pandemic. These days, there is much to strive for and much to be cautious about. Careful choices have to be made. We're not quite as relaxed as we were before. We have to be on guard and measure our steps and our distances from each other. We sanitize and we try very hard to remember when and where to wear our masks. But it is good to know that we can still come out and mingle and be among each other today instead of being restricted or locked down or having to observe a curfew. Just look around. Barbadians have risen to the occasion and are facing the challenge and are doing all right. Very few persons have declined to attend this event. When I think of our fellow Barbadians living elsewhere in the world, especially in the Western world, those places where they are recently forced to drastically adjust their movements and make careful choices about where they go, I realize that we have much to be thankful for. In this particular time in history, it is very, very good to be living in Barbados. So again, welcome, and a very happy independence to you all. The second matter I wish to address relates to a dream, or maybe I should say a hope, that I wish to share. If by some magical twist of fate I was invited to make 3 wishes to be granted, I would wish for better health, more time in the day, and books in the supermarket. Yes, I said that. Books in the supermarket. Think about it. Local products and local literature. Fancy imported food and foreign bestsellers. Or how about this one? Fresh vegetables and poetry. Why not? Books are nutritious. There's food for the body and there's also food for the mind. Reading nurtures the intellect. Barbados once boasted of a high literacy rate, but that rate is gradually slipping and the situation needs to be reversed, arrested. Many students seem to think that the internet is enough, that they can learn everything they need to learn from their electronic devices. We have wide and varied choices of electronic media and content, but we seem to forget that the mind is like a muscle. Literature forces us to flex that muscle, to be investigative and analytical, to engage in critical thinking. Movies and documentaries are entertaining and they're informative, but reading has those extra vitamins. It allows you much more time to think, to analyze, to filter, and to digest. This is one of the reasons that we are all here. Today we celebrate the birth of another nutritious, engaging piece of writing. Alwin Adams has toiled, he has researched, conducted interviews, he has listened, he has interpreted, and he has sat down to carefully chronicle the life and times of one of our beloved citizens. Sir Elliot Belgrave's memoirs are rich, flavorful, and quite enjoyable. This narrative is written in an easy, relaxed voice, and it is palatable for the old and the young. The book we are here to celebrate is Good Food. Please try not to leave here this evening without a copy. I wish to thank Mr. Adams for allowing me to assist him in making its publication a reality, and I invite you all to partake. Please enjoy this evening, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Carol. I'd now like, in the tradition of most such events in Barbados, to call upon Mr. Andre Adams to give us the opening prayer before we get on with the real business of the meeting. Andre.
Before I start, let me say good evening to all who are assembled here this evening. Almighty God, you are the inspiration and source of all creativity. You are the genesis of all goodness. We thank you this evening for the opportunity to be present for this important occasion in the life of Barbados. It is through you that Alwin has been able to produce this work on the life of one of Barbados's great sons. We thank you for the life of Sir Elliot Belgrave. May this work serve as a spark to the young persons of this country and show that through perseverance, determination, and hard work, anything is possible. All these things we ask in your gracious name. Amen.
Thank you very much, Andre. It's now my great pleasure to call on someone who is well known in Barbados as the ancient griot of Holetown, first of all, and then St. Michael. And he is someone to whom many people refer. My wife often says when I get phone calls at 10 and 11 o'clock at night asking for information about Barbados that I should be one of Barbados' information centres. Well, I think that Mr. Maurice Greenwich really deserves that title. Maurice.
Honorable John King, Minister of Culture, former Chief Justice Sir David Simmons, Patron of the Arts Sir Trevor Carmichael, President of Senate Honorable Reginald Farley, former Prime Minister Honorable Frandl Stewart, and I shall have something to say about that appellation elsewhere. Honorable members of the House and Senate, past and present, esteemed subject of the day, Sir Elliot Belgrave, and the esteemed scribe, who is my main subject, Mr. Alwin Adams. Members of the media, Madam Publisher, Miss Pitt, and Honorable Master of Ceremonies, Sir Henry Fraser. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I was hard-pressed, in fact, sorely tempted to utter an unseemly aside before formally greeting this distinguished gathering, but I have succeeded in putting that devil firmly behind me. I will now therefore place that remark on the record, and it is that neither wild horses, the hinges of Hades, nor hurricane-type weather could have prevented me from being in this room today. So, Madam Chair, in fact, Madam Publisher, I sincerely thank you for the invitation, which has provided a not-so-agile 80-year-old from, at best, telling lies, and at worst, finding some other means of becoming a fly upon the walls of Sherborne. In these days, when you see the young people with the extreme sanitization, and sometimes with the use of harsh detergent and deadly insecticide sprays, I developed a sinking feeling that if I was a fly today, I might end up dead. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I have come to tell you a story. No, not the story of this amazing book. This book will tell its own story of lifelong growth, the story of inexorable rise of a true member of the Barbadian proletariat from servitude to supreme service. And I use the word servitude advisedly, for in my book, the era of physical slavery in these English Caribbean islands ended only in the aftermath of the explosive events of mid-July 1937, by which time our esteemed subject was just past his 7th birthday. I'm talking about the aftermath, not the events themselves. The story I have come to tell, and it is a short story, is about the remarkable synergy of two kindred spirits, both from the bowels of the agricultural north, both from villages which did not shirk from raising their children, and both men, when in their preteens, though nearly a generation apart, entered hallowed halls whose doors bore the insignia Palmam qui meruit ferat. For the classicists, let him who is deserving wear the palm. But for lesser mortals, among whom I find myself, let him who strains and strives be the one to win the prize. I've got to put it in a rhyme that I can remember it. Ladies and gentlemen, you will devour the story of our distinguished and esteemed subject, Sir Elliot. But I now tell you of his scribe, Alwin Adams, who entered a school in the name of not one, but two bishops of Barbados, Coleridge and Parry, thought it had seen the last of him when he graduated in 1961. As the fates would have it, however, he too found himself in England, teaching and learning, gaining his degree, then his teacher's diploma, for he had chosen that noble calling of bringing out the best from our children. Soon, two Barbadian men of the cloth were mainly responsible for recruiting him from London to teach in the Methodist community of Freeport, Bahamas. The Reverends Eric Clark and Edwin Taylor were well known to Barbadian Methodists of a certain age and older. After 7 years on Grand Bahama, Alwin Adams returned to Barbados to the newly minted St. James Secondary School at Trent's, an institution of which I had some adverse familiarity. But thereafter, his stellar career took flight. You must get him sometime to tell you how the country boy, away from home since a mere youth, could not, after coming back to Barbados, and perhaps getting his first car, find his way to foundation school. And he had to keep asking and asking and asking. Let him tell you how he finally arrived and met a man in the car park. And this is not a formal visit to the school. He's just trying to find his way around Barbados. He met this man in the car park, ready to leave. And let him tell you how that man, hearing who he was, could then recite the names of his aunties, his uncles, his father, his mother, and of his relative in England with whom Lewiston Wellington had stayed while he had studied in Leeds. The most pertinent part, in fact, the only pertinent part of that sightseeing Saturday morning in that car park chat was, can you start to work here on Monday? You see, Wellington and his family had originated in Spring Head. The Adams family had also originated in Spring Head. If the Adams family and that village could raise this boy, send him to England to do his tertiaries, and then the Duke of Wellington could hire him almost sight unseen, like a good speculator could buy promising livestock by simply looking at it on the hoof. I used the word inexorable earlier. Now change that to meteoric. For Alwin's star was more like a comet, soon deputy head at that school, and then a move to St. Leonard's Boys as head. And then the blind-sided walls of Dover Fort and Ashton Hall would have him back, this time not as head of the class, but as head of the school. The prize was now truly in his palm. There, an active old Scholars Association would inevitably place Sir Elliot and Alwin Adams together. Elliot Belgrave, the boy from Boscobel, and Alwin of the tribe Adams from the head of the Amerindian Spring at Ayong Hororo. Both places of sheer Barbadian, breathtaking beauty, with unlimited views across the eastern seas longing towards the motherland. Alwin Adams reached the peak of his career in education. Sir Elliot Belgrave had earlier reached his peak in jurisprudence, Queen's Counsel, Judge of the Supreme Court, and Acting Chief Justice, and then, wonderful to tell, our sixth native Governor General and the first from among the peasantry. He most certainly had a story to tell to inspire our children and our children's children. Now, Alwin Adams sat at the feet of this very Gamaliel. Adams listened, and he wrote, and we now have a book, his story, told by our modern Gamaliel to his worthy scribe, Abibus Alvinius Ben Adam. But here, John Milton, many a man lives a burden to the earth, but a good book is the precious lifeblood of a master spirit, embalmed and treasured on purpose to a life beyond life. A good book, an excellent book, is what we now have. Now, if I may quote the original Gamaliel, he said, and I quote, "Eschew doubtful matters, and tithe not overmuch by guesswork. Tithe not overmuch by guesswork," unquote. There is absolutely no guesswork in this book. Abibus Ben Adam sat at the feet of a worthy Gamaliel who hailed from the bowels of Boscobel. Ben Adam listened and learned, and he has writ well. An Ashton Hall student once said to me, "Mr. Adams is a good teacher, and he is a good man. What more then can I ask?" I ask this, that he too soon tells his story. And then I ask that his book and this book, by your good grace, shall soon be flying free. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maurice. And while you meditate on the words of the grey-out of the whole town, I have the pleasure of inviting to perform for you Abraham Millington on the trombone, Dexter Norville on the flute, and Marlon Legall on the keyboard to perform Flying Free. Here they come. Ladies and gentlemen, was that not splendid? I can tell by the bobbing of the heads and the tapping of the fingers and the toes and the swaying of the bodies and the chairs that everyone leaving tonight will be flying free. Ladies and gentlemen, before I invite Alwin to the podium, I am reminded by some of the words written in this wonderful book, Notes of a Native Governor-General, that Sir Elliot said, and I quote, "I think it is true to say that of all the duties which I performed during my tenure, the one which has made a lasting impact upon me was the appointment of senators. They all made valuable contributions to debates in the upper chamber, and I regard my decision to appoint them as the high point in the exercise of my discretion." Your words, sir. And as I look around and I see Dr. Carol Jacobs, Lady Haynes, and I see my friend Tony Marshall and Sir Trevor Carmichael and Alwin himself, am I missing anyone? And I see Nigel and John Watson over here. How can I miss you, John? And larger than life, and in white, to besides. I feel almost as if I'm back in the Senate. But the difference, Sir Elliot, is that what is going to be said here this evening is going to be a lot more important, a lot more precious, a lot more valuable, and a lot less gaseous than what happened in the Senate. Alwin Adams, your time.
First, let me say that the music which you just heard really is colder than Paris come to town. That is the type of performance for which the Cordes Paris School is noted. Teachers and students. And I must say, in good Boscobellian language, that I feel as though I'm in Goat Heaven and Kitty Palace. Thank you, Mr. Master of Ceremonies. Honorable John King, Minister of Culture, former Chief Justice, Honorable David Simmons, Patron of the Arts, Sir Trevor Carmichael, former Prime Minister, Honorable Frondell Stewart, honorable members of the House and Senate, retired Governor General Sir Elliot Fitzroy Belgrave, members of the media, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. The genesis of these memoirs can be traced to a speech delivered by me on the floor of the Senate on the occasion of tribute to the late Branford Tate. In my presentation, I pointed out that despite boasting of having a very high literacy rate in Barbados, we can scarcely count the biographers of outstanding Barbadians on one hand. And someone said that the history of the world is but the biography of great men. I also went on to suggest that steps should be taken to correct this national deficiency. And furthermore, such scholarly works should be compulsory reading for young students in our schools and institutions of higher learning. Having done that, I received a call from Sir Elliot, and there ensued a conversation in which I was told, I think I prompted him, that he wanted to make a permanent record of what he called his recollections. Little did I know at the time that those comments would have led to a call from Sir Elliot for me to be involved in what I would call this literary exercise which we're here today. but which has been described elsewhere, I think is by Sir Hilary Beckles, as the grand narrative of a resolute and a remarkable man, Sir Elliot. Based on the source of that request, it is obvious that I could not say no. When certain people ask you a question, they ask you because they expect the answer yes. So I undertook this pressing assignment from a sense of patriotic duty. But after many hours of videotaping and face-to-face interviews and tete-a-tetes, our joint enterprise, that is, between Sir Elliot and myself, became what I would call a labor of love. By the time I was ready to put pen to paper, I had come to know Sir Elliot so well that in transcribing his recollections, there was such a meeting of the minds that I believe I was able to put the reader, that is to put you, in the shoes of Sir Elliot and to be able to see things from his perspective. It was as though I was in his head. As a matter of fact, I actually went helter-skelter writing in what you would call the third person. And it was going quite well. I thought it was doing well. And a friend of mine, an author in the United States, and a friend of mine here in Barbados, Mr. Martin Ramsey, having looked over it, they said to me, I think you were itching to write this in the first person. And as a result, this literary work, Notes of Governor General, is written as though it is an autobiography. And that is not an easy task at all. But what I found particularly intriguing about Sir Elliot is that although he had a compelling story to tell, he always went out of his way to indicate that the book is not about him alone. It had to be about the times in which he lived and about the people with whom he interacted and the people who helped him on his way. Elliot was not born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Conditions were tough in those days. But two attributes stand out about him, stand out. He was never daunted by difficulties, but set about to conquer them by perseverance, patience, resilience, and above all, elevation of character. Secondly, although Sir Elliot ascended to the highest echelons, the highest realm in the society, he never forgot where he came from. He was also ever grateful to those who helped him on the way, who helped him to navigate the Barbadian society at a time when it was riddled with racial prejudice, where if you were white, you were all right. If you were brown, you could stick around. And if you were black, you could stand back. That is how it was in the 30s and even the 40s. As the narrative unfolds, though, you will find that he moved on to England. And as I spoke with him, he wanted to make sure that he get from within him what he described as some of the sordid episodes of the treatment of West Indian immigrants in what we call the mother country, and that it should not be swept under the carpet. So you will find some of that in the book. He felt very strongly that young black students should have an authentic version of the plight of West Indian immigrants who lived in London at the time. He did not and he does not want them to rely solely on oral history, because to do so would run the risk of being reduced to a footnote in history or a passing blip or just an afterthought. Colonial historians have a reputation of writing us out of history. And if you were to go to London now, you would find that there is not one iota of the tremendous contributions made by West Indians, where the hospitals could not run without West Indian nurses, including my wife. The buses could not run. In fact, the economy would probably fall to pieces. And yet, throughout the curriculum, not one mention is made of that. So Elliot thought that perhaps this is something that ought to be done. And so there is a chapter in the book about that. However, I am not really here to tell you all about this book, because that would be counterproductive. And if I were to do so, you would probably not buy the book. So if you really want to hear anything more, I think you ought to pay. So I am going to simply kind of come to a conclusion by saying that Sir Elliot has a deep and abiding faith in education in our young people. And as Sir Henry just said, he made a point to visit every single primary school in this country. A tremendous feat. And, you know, you may ask maybe why he would want to do that. And many, many years ago, a philosopher was asked that question. And his response was that there is no better way for adults to spend their time than to be involved in the training of young people. And why did he say that? He said, because young people are the harvest field and the raw materials of the nation. And one of the last acts before demitting office of Sir Elliot, apart from visiting all the primary schools, was to set up a scholarship fund. Sir Trevor Carmichael, who is here, and others are part of that committee, and Lady Haynes. And I think he made a statement that I wrote down. And he said, and I will end with this, it seems to me that now would be a good time for those of us who can lend a hand, a helping hand, to do a little bit to help those students in straitened circumstances, because talent should not be left buried in the sands of time. I want to make an appeal in relation to this book that it should be in every single school in this country. And indeed in the institutions of higher learning as well. And I normally like to put my mouth where my money is, or my money where my mouth is, whichever way you want to put it. And so I have, as a matter of fact, started negotiations with the credit unions, because they are the poor man's bank, and that is where the poor man's money is. And therefore, I think that they ought to lead the way in coming together and pooling their resources and making sure that copies of this book, notes of a native Governor General, a man from the grassroots, from the craggy hills of Boscobel to the spiral staircase of Government House. I think that that's a story that ought to be told in a book that ought to be read. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Alwin. I now have the pleasure of inviting recorded remarks by our famous author, Ronald Williams. In the old days, authors had to emigrate to London in order to write like George Lamming. Ronald, I suppose I could label one of the last of the emigrant authors, since he lives in the USA and because of COVID-19 wasn't able to be here. So if we could have the recording of Ronald Williams.
Good evening, everyone. I'll assume that the usual protocols have been observed. First, let me say congratulations to Sir Elliot on the launch of his autobiography, but more importantly, on a well-lived life that created the substance of the book. Similarly, my congratulations to Senator Adams, my friend Alwin, for completing what was obviously a labor of love. I'd also like to mention Mr. Martin Ramsey, Ram to his friends, whose comprehensive knowledge of all things Barbadian proved invaluable in the construction of the book. Any writer of fiction will indicate that finding the core of a character is the preeminent challenge of writing. There are the what, when, where, and why as well, but the who is critical. What is this person about? That's always the question. I must say that within the first 20 pages of this book, the who became very clear. So Elliot establishes very early 4 poles that both shape and guide his existence. The first pole are his parents. It is from them that he learns the twin virtues of perseverance and social economy. The second is the headmaster at his primary school, Mr. Riley. Predictably, Mr. Riley is the model for academic excellence, but he's also the ethical center of young Elliot's life. The third pole is the Anglican Church and the priests. These collectively provide the moral framework that guides Elliot throughout his life. The last pole is the corner shop and the shopkeeper. Here he learns about egalitarianism. In the shop, he sees the value of community extended beyond the immediate family. These qualities inform the whole book, and we see them given flesh and blood in the decisions that he makes as an attorney, a judge, and as Governor General. So Elliot's pursuit of excellence was evident during school and in his further studies, but it is in England that we see for the first time a burning anger bursting through. If the first part of the book is affectionate, in spite of the hardships of a plantation-dominated life, the middle section is more distant. The descriptions are journalistic, as the writer controls passion and searches for objectivity. In this, he largely succeeds, although one senses the profound sense of unfairness he feels at the treatment of West Indians in England. Mercifully, he survives the Notting Hill riots that he chronicles. The final section of the book is touching, affectionate without being sentimental. It is hardly surprising that Sir Elliot chose to end his career with an homage to youth. In the first section of the book, he had established the affection he felt for his own school days. Beyond that, one senses that he knows The supportive village structure that did so much to aid his growth is now gone. He therefore seeks to instill in a modern, fast-moving world something of the beauty and love of that older world. This is encapsulated in his love of the ash grove. I personally had forgotten the song, so when he mentioned it, I went to YouTube. Suddenly I found myself crying, reminded of my own more innocent time. I do not know Sir Elliot, have never spoken to him, but in that moment I felt as if I occupied his skin, so close was the attachment. I'll close by saying that this book must not simply be bought, but must also be read. It brilliantly captures a time, a place, a history, a motive, and most importantly, a person that all Barbadians need to understand. My very best to you, Sir Elliot, on a life well lived, and good luck with the book. Good evening.
That was so short and sweet. I was almost disappointed when he stopped. But I was struck when he commented on the pillars of the village when we grow up and the corner shop. And I have always been surprised by the disappearance of the corner shop, put out of business by the big oil companies. And none of our politicians bothered, because the lady and the gentleman running the corner shop were the social capital that helped to look after the children of the village. And we have lost that social capital, and nobody noticed. I now have the pleasure of calling on Carol Pitt for a brief reading from the book. Carol.
The first reading consists of two excerpts from chapter 11. That chapter is entitled, A Belgrave Enters the Coleridge School. As soon as Sylvester and I got to know the ropes, we hit on a plan to walk from Boscobel to the Coleridge School in order to save bus fare. One morning in the crop time, as we were walking briskly along, there were female laborers bending over in the early morning sun, tying bundles of canes behind their cane-cutting partners. All of a sudden, they saw this rare sight. Two black boys, Sylvester and I, smartly dressed in uniform, shoes and socks with school bags over our shoulders. The reaction of these female laborers was spontaneous. Their maternal instincts took over. They stopped working and ran at breakneck speed to the head row to meet and greet Mrs. Williams and Mrs. Belgrave's boys, the two grammar school boys. They addressed us in the folk idiom. "We so proud of una. Go safely here. Don't be late. Behave on yourselves. Don't get the masters any trouble. Make sure when I get some papers. And don't waste when a parent's coppers." I can never forget that chance encounter. It encapsulated what getting a grammar school education meant to ordinary field laborers in those days. It imprinted on my mind the hopes, fears, and the deep anxieties that occupy the minds of the agricultural workers in Barbados. Even at this distance, I can still identify with those ladies' every word. The message was as simple as it was sincere. They, the older generation, were pinning their hopes of black scholastic success on us, the younger generation. I am happy to say that we did not let them down. Sylvester reached the top ranks of the Royal Barbados Police Force, and I became a High Court judge and went on to hold the highest office in the nation. There was the story of a boy who went to the toilet. I was in no hurry to get to the form room early because he knew that the Spanish teacher always took his time after lunch and was always late. As he came out of the bathroom, he saw the teacher coming down at his inimitable slow measured pace, satchel in hand and head leaning to one side. At the same time, he could also hear loud noises coming from the boys in the form room. He rushed to get to the form before the master and to warn the boys. As he approached the door of the form, he pushed his head forward and warned the boys in a muted voice, "The old boy coming down." The master's nickname was Old Boy. This class, as expected, immediately became silent. The master, of course, had heard and observed everything. His entry to the form room, on his entry to the form room, the boys promptly stood up. The master sat down as though he was ignorant of what went on. He then, in a very serious tone, called the informant by name, ordering him to stand up, and as he stood up, said to him, "Sonny, you must write me 1,000 lines, 100 every day, and the next time you see the old boy coming down, keep it dark." The boys could not contain themselves with laughter. He then smirked and said in Spanish, "He who laughs last, laughs best." Apparently, the ethos of the old school continued into the new one.
Ladies and gentlemen, we now have the great pleasure of welcoming for the performance of Culture, Dr. the Honorable Anthony Gabby Carter. And here comes Gabby.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have performed a lot of times in my life, including at this same hall. And this is a special moment for me. I'll tell you why very quickly before I sing this song. He does not know it, but one of his biggest fans, Sir Henry, is me. For many reasons. One is that he took care of my brother-in-law until he died, Theo Cox. And Theo loved Sir Henry. Sir Elliot, he beat me, I'll tell you how. We decided that we will visit all the schools in Barbados. Sir Elliot, I want you to know I am yet to visit the Dayton Griffith School. I did all the others. And we will always meet. And he would have the temerity to say to me, "Gabby, but what are you doing here again?" And I said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "No, I am the Governor General, and I have the right to be here." I said, "But you know, they asked me to come too." And he said, "But you know, you obviously got to sing Emerton." And on every single occasion at every school we went to, I had to sing Emerton. So Elliot, I don't have to sing Emerton this evening. So I got back my little thing on you. When it comes to Alwin Adams, I met him 60 years ago because he was my teacher at St. Leonard's. And I always try to fight it down, but I can probably say it for the first time, that I went to St. Leonard's, but with all Combermere teachers except for Alwin Adams. So they used to always refer to me as an honorary Combermerean because they claimed that my teachers came from Combermere, which was true. We had a split school at that time. We would go to school 8 till 12 and 1 till 5. So the teachers would come down from Combermere to teach us at St. Leonard's. Alwin Adams, he will never remember this. He said to me one day, "You're not a bad student, But your calling is music. When Alwin Adams said you're not a bad student, it means you're pretty good. But I ever used to be singing in the class and all of that, and giving unnecessary trouble. And I remember there was a teacher called Mr. Isaac, and he said to me, who is Reverend Isaac's dad, he said to me one day, youngster, that cacophony of noise you're making is not singing. Please learn the gift of gab so you can communicate with the rest of us, because you're disrupting the class. If you come in here not to learn, it is okay with me, but you would do that outside of my class, because the other students here would like to learn. So you could learn the gift of gab. And I said, the gift of gab, what is that? Well, you could become a gabby. So I went looking in the dictionary and it said, talkative or eloquent speaker. I said, that sounds like me. And those experiences have stood with me my whole life. Sir Elliot, I want to thank you for all you have done for Barbados and for being my friend all of these years. All of this talk about culture, driving me mad, I'm taking it hard. All of the talk about culture, driving me mad, I'm taking it hard. How them expect to have a culture plan for Caribbean man from North Americans? We got to start here at home, then we'll no longer roam. I mean, wine made from dunk and guava, that is my culture. Donkey steak out in pasta, that is my culture. Flying fish floating pan cuckoo, that is my culture. Fried bacon, rice and stew, that is my culture. So now you see what I really mean. This is my true culture in the Caribbean. Oh, now you see what I really mean. This is my true culture in the Caribbean. Hey, hey, la dambe, dabambe, dambade, babadi di langudi, bam 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 bambade, bam bam be, la bam bam be. All of them shows on TV, you must agree, are not for we. Show me some castle in my skin by George Lamin for my viewing. All them could fill in the spot with Derek Walcott instead of that trash like Sanford and Mash. Then we could stare in their face and show them we cultural base. I mean, leaving the child at granny, that is my culture. And look, guy code for the child money, that is my culture. Mismatching the latest fashion, that is my culture. Love making with a passion, well, that is my culture. So now you see what I really mean. This is my true culture in the Caribbean. Oh, now you see what I really mean. And this is my true culture in the Caribbean. Oh, babambe, bim bambe, bam bambe, dim dum dum de, la dambe, la la li li lam balum bam bim bam 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 bambe, le la dambe, de body de lambade. La dum bam 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 dip. This cultural penetration that's happening, it shows one thing. We got to find a new direction in programming to save we skin. We can't allow West Indians to bow to foreign pressure from North America. So Cashbox and Billboard must go for West Indian culture to grow. I mean, box, cat and stick for wicket, that is my culture. Mobby and marble cricket, that is my culture. Slamming domino in competition, that is my culture. Calypso and sweet steel band, that is my culture. So now you see what I really mean. This is my true culture in the Caribbean. Oh, oh, and now you see what I really mean. And this is my true culture in the Caribbean. Ooh, ooh. Bambe, dum bambe, dum bambe, dum bamba. This is my true culture in the Caribbean. Sir Elliot, with your permission, I want to do one verse of your song. You tell me to forget that my grandmother was born right there, so all right, I say I shall go. You tell me to forget, it is there I want my own children to grow. Well, all right, I say I shall go. But I hope you understand how I feel about Emerton, my homeland, my homeland, my homeland. I hope you know it's true that I would never forgive you, because look what you do to my American. You tell me to forget that my grandmother was born right there, so all right, I say I shall go. 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 Thank you.
Thank you very much, the Honourable Mighty Gabby. I have the distinction, like Sir Jack Dare, of having the Mighty Gabby writing a calypso about me. I never heard him sing it, but I had given a keynote address at the opening of Culture Week, and it was just after Walking Up had become a byword in Barbados, and it was on everyone's lips. And I had talked about the varieties of culture and the fact that Walking Up wasn't our only aspect of culture. Well, Bayesian say, who tell me say that? And so I didn't hear it sung, but I did see it published in the Sunday Sun the following Sunday, a nice calypso that Gabby wrote about me. Now, moving on, I now have the pleasure, following Gabby, of asking my fellow senator, who sat next to me in the Senate Sir Trevor Carmichael. And I have to say that Sir Trevor sat between Alwin and myself. And so quite often when we received a bill, and it was sometimes a little bit late in the day, I see Nigel has left, but sometimes we didn't always know what we were going to debate until that morning. And we would often make a decision between the three of us as to which aspect of the bill one of us might address, because it was always very difficult to cover it all. So Alwin, Sir Trevor, and I were often like the Three Stooges, making decisions on who would say what. So Trevor, now's your time to say what.
Mr. Master of Ceremonies, thank you. And I like the way you say it, senators. It makes it appear as if we're still senators. And I suppose it feels good. Sir Elliot and Lady Loretta in absentia, my Lord Chief Justice, Mr. Pat Cheltenham, former Prime Minister, Mr. Frundle Stewart, former Chief Justice, Sir David Simmons, Honourable Anthony Gabby Carter, and the Honourable Mr. Stetson Wiltshire, Senator Reginald Farley and Mrs. Farley, other senators who may be here, the Honourable Justice Sherman Moore and Mrs. Moore, and there are many people here. I don't want to leave anyone out. This is very important. Mr. Maurice Greenidge, and our special speaker this evening, the Honourable John King, Minister of Culture in the Prime Minister's Office. And may I say, friends of Sir Elliot, because indeed, that's what we all are. And basically, that's why we're all here. Sorry, Alwin, you too. But let me say, and I say friends, because the special conviviality of this late November evening warrants that term. That is the right appellation, friends. And allow me first to say that while I am honored, and I say truly humbled, to have been asked to say these few words at this very important and significant book launch, my self-imposed duty is really to pay my deepest respect and fulsome appreciation of the object of our attention and affection this evening, Sir Elliot Fitzroy Belgrave. I therefore feel it necessary to place these 5 minutes or so remarks in the context of Sir Elliot as expressed in this book, this truly magnum opus, and indeed elsewhere, and maybe I say everywhere, to place them in the context of a genuine and true work of art. Now, you may ask, why do I say a work of art? Let us attempt to view the quality of the art, the value of the art, and that art which is Sir Elliot. How do these things help to understand Sir Elliot? Art helps us to understand ourselves, to understand others, and to understand the circumstances which surround us. And when one reviews and views Sir Elliot's portrait, so well painted in this very carefully and adroitly written book by Mr. Alwin Adams, one is taken to review a very special piece of art. And I mention a few areas. As a prosecutor, serious but sincere. As a judge of first instance, careful but also consistent. And as an appeal court judge, reflective but never righteous. And as a person, solid, sincere, and I could say a lot more. So when we consider our esteemed former Governor General as a truly special work of art, we recognize that his has been one of landscapes and seascapes, of sunrises and sunsets, of portraits and pen lines. But when I say of sunrises and sunsets, I think in particular of his later years. For as we heard earlier, he added that very popular school visit to those which he had so graciously accorded to the centenarians as well. And that is truly a painting which bridges our Barbadian coasts from east to west and north to south, and also bridge those who have labored and those from whom great labors will be expected. Those who have labored are older people, and those from whom labors will be expected are young people. Ladies and gentlemen, art's value is often grounded in the age of the art, and indeed of the artist as well. In this respect, 1931 was the year of Sir Elliot's birth, and it was a special year in the growth of Barbadian art. Possibly one of our least known artists, but one with an exceptionally good eye, was a man with the name Basil Jones. We don't hear a lot about him. But he was later to train many young local artists and pave the way for names which we know so well in today's art scene. A development and a developmental focus not unlike that of Sir Elliot. If we look far away in Canada, coming to life in 1931, just like Sir Elliot, but now settled in Barbados, is a woman called Goldie Spieler, who has contributed so much to the popularization of modern pottery and modern art in Barbados. And I suggest that these two artists of the same birth year as Sir Elliot, and like him, are powerful and evocative in their work and in their social contribution. And the three of them mirror each other. But equally important is the fact that in their varying backgrounds, together they represent an inclusiveness which is one of the hallmarks of a former head of state, and indeed the subject matter of this well-written treatise on one who, in popular parlance, has always kept it real. But on the 16th of March, 1931, which is his birthday, it was special, not only in terms of art, but also for an occurrence which all good geography and history students will remember, and I'm sure all of his students that he's been assisting will try to remember it. It was in the Sea of Marmara off Istanbul in Turkey where a major occurrence took place. 3 men, a fishing boat, and a giant shark. And I guess you can figure out what happened. The giant shark crushes the boat, but then miraculously does not follow the boat and its male crew, who after a 2-hour ordeal survive at sea, shaken but secure. And I suggest that just bear this in mind visually. While this is all happening, young Elliot is being peaceably birthed right here in Barbados, in the north at Boscobel in St. Peter. And if we are to believe the philosophers rooted in the study of nature and the universe, and there's some good reason to give them credence, then those human qualities of perseverance, courage, and steadfastness of these 3 fishermen were not lost on our esteemed Sir Elliot, then young Elliot, and have been beautifully captured in his well-written and balanced biography, this work of art in words. On a personal note, I am humbled to have been asked to heed his call to be one of his independent senators. And as you have heard, we have tried during that tenure to do it as best we could. And I was also honored and grateful to be asked to chair his trustees of the Elliot and Loretta Belgrave Charitable Trust, and to help in the extraordinary work which that trust has undertaken for young students at the university level and also at the elementary and primary school level. A most remarkable set of achievements in a short space of time of just about 4 years. So allow me therefore to close by invoking on behalf of everyone here a special word of thanks to you, Sir Elliot, whom we all love, we respect, and we admire. We hold all these feelings for you as a great work of art, indeed a special piece of art, and now the sole subject matter of this well-written text, which is being shared with all and sundry to enjoy and indeed to appreciate. In closing, allow me the further liberty of changing the gender in the well-known Shakespeare quotation, and I should say, even if you do not allow me to change the gender, I shall do so liberally, since most of Shakespeare's message is gender-free. Age, Sir Elliot, will not wither him, nor custom stale his infinite variety. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sir Trevor. And you will have noticed from your program that we now are going to have remarks from none other than our recent Prime Minister, Mr. Freundel Stewart. Now, I have to tell you a little story that relates to Mr. Stewart and Sir Elliot, because I had been writing a column for many years, and sometimes my column was rather provocative. So when I got a call from the private secretary at Government House, Sir Elliot would be grateful if you'd be kind enough to come around at 10 o'clock tomorrow to see him. I thought, oh my God, what have I done? Well, I went around and Sir Elliot said to me, I have been consulting with the Prime Minister and I would like to invite you to be a senator. And he said to me, when I told the Prime Minister said this, the Prime Minister said, do not invite him, tell him. Well, the Prime Minister was mentored by my father-in-law, who had the good offices to not just mentor, but to produce my wife. And so when Sir Elliot said, the Prime Minister said, tell him, he added, his wife will agree. So, ladies and gentlemen, those of us who are married know that a happy wife is a happy life. And when I said, but Sir Elliot, I will have to call my wife in spite of what the Prime Minister says, Sir Elliot gave me the telephone and said, call her. The rest is history. So I would now take great pleasure in inviting Mr. Freundel Stewart to please come to the podium and give us your remarks, sir.
Master of Ceremonies, members of the Cabinet, Honorable Chief Justice, former Chief Justice of Barbados, former Justice of Appeal, and Mrs. Moore, members of Parliament, present and past, Sir Elliot Belgrave, Mr. Alwin Adams, very distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by saying how honored I felt to have received this invitation to be here this evening at the launch of this autobiography of Sir Elliot Belgrave, not so a native Governor General. I'm very pleased to accept the invitation and to say a few words. I first became aware of the existence of Sir Elliot Belgrave when I was still a teenager. I first heard his name in a rum shop at Marchfield, St. Philip. A driver at the Transport Board was having a conversation with another gentleman, and that gentleman was rejoicing at the fact that a then much feared magistrate in Barbados, Mr. Lennox Perry, had gone back to Guyana, and that drivers would not have to deal with him anymore. The Transport Board driver listened with very careful and polite attention, and then in that racy St. Philip vernacular, say to him, but you know, I hear you, but I ain't going along with you with that. Because Perry gone, but they now bring a man named Belgrave, and he looking much worse. I was a very ardent reader of court reports in those days and followed very carefully the decisions and the comments of Magistrate Belgrave as he then was. And on no occasion was I ever inclined to disagree with the Transport Board driver. I then first met him in 1984 in the flesh. I was then attached to the chambers as a trainee, the chambers of Mr. David Simmons, as he then was, Sir David Simmons now. I was in what Dr. Ronald Williams would have called a state of in-betweenity. I had completed law school, but had not yet been admitted to the bar. And I went across to the court to observe some cases, and Sir Elliot was prosecuting a murder case before then Chief Justice Sir William Douglas. The details of that murder case do not make for happy recital, so I should pass over that. But I did observe Sir Elliot prosecuting that case with strenuousness and tenacity, but also in the highest traditions of the prosecutorial function. And needless to say, of course, he secured the conviction which the accused deserved And it was for me an unforgettable lesson in how a case should be done. By 1987, he was appointed a judge of the High Court, and it was my privilege and pleasure to appear before him in civil matters, in criminal matters, and of course in family matters. And he was always the judicious and balanced adjudicator of matters before him. But I always found it a special pleasure to be in his court doing family matters. And for the simple reason that family matters get to court because relationships are broken down. And both male and female, husband and wife, both spouses, usually are experiencing a sense of failure. And I would watch him invariably endure the submissions of the lawyers, but keep the litigants under unceasing observation. And at a certain point in the case, he would just virtually push the lawyers aside and deal with the litigants himself. He would ask the questions he thought would give him the answers that would allow him to come to the decision that would make both of those parties happy. And invariably, he succeeded in doing that. And it has always been my experience that those litigants walked away from the court with a sense that justice was done. And that all had to do with the fact that he understood human beings very well and took the time to make sure that he dispensed the justice which was his responsibility. It was his responsibility to do. So I thought he was a very good judge. And of course, another feature of Sir Elliot as a judge is that he understood that he was not perfect, and he was not required to be perfect. He was just required to be faithful. And therefore, he did not spend all of his time trying to be perfect. It was his view that if you were not satisfied, the Court of Appeal was there, but that it was his duty to try to get your problem solved as quickly as possible and according to his lights, in the light of the law. So then, when the time came, of course, our roles had changed by then with the effluxion of time, and I ended up in the Prime Minister's office. Having observed him over a long period of time, what for me would otherwise have been the exercise of a discretion became for me a duty. For after Sir Clifford Husband's demitted office after about 14 years, I had to make the decision to appoint or to recommend to Her Majesty the Queen the appointment of a Governor General. And I felt by then that it was my duty to recommend Sir Elliot Belgrave to her. It's a decision I've never regretted because he discharged the functions of that office with impressive personal dignity, but at all times with humility. And I will always remember, and it has been mentioned here by many speakers who have preceded me, his visits to primary schools. And I have to remember his visits to primary schools because, to my certain knowledge, those visits made a very heavy impact on the students of primary schools. I was once, at Independence Time, invited to the St. Philip's Primary School to speak to the students there. And I will never forget that a very a young student came up to me and said to me, "Sir, but why are you here? The Governor General went here already." My presence was therefore superfluous. But he carried the office of Governor General to children, and they had a chance to touch, as it were, the hem of his garment and to get a sense of what they could become, because his journey was going to be their journey as well. And that is the significance, in my view, of notes of a native Governor General, because it is my considered opinion that Sir Elliot is not just an individual. He's not even just a particular, but he's a general in the sense that his journey mirrors the journey of thousands of Barbadians, including my own journey. And that's why I feel able to readily identify myself with the splendid efforts of Mr. Alwin Adams, working along with Sir Elliot to produce this great memoir, which I wish every success. When I was arriving here this evening, my attention was caught by the luxuriant foliage and the floral beauty of plant life outside of the Lloyd Erskine Sandiford Centre. And it occurred to me that that foliage and that floral splendor could not have been possible if those plants, those trees, did not have roots and were not firmly connected to their roots. And for me, it was a kind of metaphor of the life of Sir Elliot Belgrave. Because being sworn in as Governor General of Barbados is certainly not a time to express regrets. But I sat in the Senate chamber as he addressed the chamber at his installation, and he expressed two regrets. One, that his father, Albert, had died at age 54 and had not lived long enough to see what he would have become. And his mother, Jewsbury Adora, he expressed the regret that she could not have been present to see what her little Elliot had become. He regretted that they were not there to be able to say to him, "You did not let us down. You did not let the side down. You followed the script, and we are proud of you." And that is enough to recommend him to me. He has never forgotten his roots. We all see the foliage and we see the floral beauty, but all that is connected to roots. And Sir Elliot Belgrave is connected to his roots. And I congratulate him on this memoir and wish him all the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next event is a performance called Ashgrove, and the folks who are going to do this for us are Rachel Ann Bourne, first soprano, Tonya King, soprano, and Martin Legal at the keyboard. Here they come. Thank you. Thank you. Wasn't that wonderful? We're about to have the recorded remarks of Sir Elliot himself. Could we have that recording?
The Honourable Mr. John King, Minister of Culture, Honourable Chief Justice, Mr. Patterson Cheltenham, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Let me start by saying that neither hell nor high water, not even COVID-19, could prevent me from being here this evening. After all, it is my book, Sunday Sermon, and your presence here this evening is testimony to the rich theme of friendship which exists between us. My attorney at law, Mr. Nigel Jones, has instructed me that I should be brief, because if I say too much about the book, there would be no incentive to buy it. Right. I'm sure you do not want to leave here without an autographed copy of this book, which has been described by Professor Henry Beckles as one of the finest tales ever told by an Afro-Caribbean sage. It is a story told by me in my own words about aspects of life in early 20th century Barbados, when society was strictly organized along racial lines. My pilgrimage to London has also been included. Now, Mr. Adams has worked closely with me to create this book. He has succeeded in making this a permanent record for the benefit of future generations of Barbadians, especially the youth, born and unborn. I believe that this is of paramount importance because a people without knowledge of their past history and culture is like a tree without roots and is in danger of being deemed irrelevant, ignored by the historians. For too long, our colonial masters have excluded, erased our contributions from the records on the grounds that we have no history, no traditions, and no culture. This book seeks to put an end to such distortions and downright injustices, and to remind all readers about the extraordinary contributions made by some Barbadians over the years. Mr. Adams has been able to demonstrate that the narrative is not only about me. As the story unfolds, we'll find that several persons have contributed to my success over the years. For example, my dear parents, and the church leaders, especially Reverend Canon Oswald Everton Jones, my headmaster, Mr. John Patterson O'Reilly, and many others too numerous to mention here. Perhaps I have already said too much. What I must tell you, however, is that this book is written in a style that appeals to all Barbadians of all ages, at some at home and abroad. Above all, it sets out to inspire young people to pay attention to their education. because as Nelson Mandela reminds us, education is the great engine of personal growth. That it is true education that the daughter of a peasant can become a doctor, that the child of hardworking parents can become the head of state. When charged to you during this independence and Yuletide season, it is simple to observe social distance. That is, wash your hands, wear a mask, and of course get your book and read it before putting it on the shelf to be forgotten. Without reading it. May God bless you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Sir Elliot. Now, everyone may not know that we had calypsos mentioned earlier on, that a calypso was also written about Sir Elliot. Because, as indicated earlier, the stories of his legal profession, everything was not always straightforward, and some things were a little controversial. And there is a section in the book in which he writes about the fact that more than anything else, Barbadians wanted to feel safe and to be able to sleep peacefully in their beds at night. They identified violent crime as the greatest single threat to their peace and well-being. I believe I therefore had a clear mandate to use the full force of the law against violent criminals, and against that backdrop, I had no hesitation in ordering a heartless criminal to be subjected to a flogging with the cat o' nine tails. The Court of Appeal reversed the ruling, but the decision gained overwhelming national support, and my ruling was immortalized in one of the most famous calypsos sung by the impressive, mighty observer Colin Reed. And I will not attempt to sing it for you. My wife would be devastated. I'll have to read it. The drugs and the violence rampant in this country, who in their right mind could disagree? I don't give a damn how you chit-chat. I done decide to reintroduce the cat. So, Sir Elliot, that was the calypso about you. Now we have recorded remarks from Sir Hilary, who is unable to be here because, of course, she's on university duty in Jamaica, and we can't fly back and forth quite as quickly as we'd like to. And Sir Hilary's remarks are really very interesting. He wrote the foreword to the book, which you will enjoy reading. And he wrote, "It is the grand narrative of a resolute and remarkable man from Barbados, one of the finest tales ever told by an African Caribbean sage. It begins at the source, the village of Boscobel, which, as Sir Elliot remarks, was once known as Behind God's Back. It is the memoir," says Sir Hilary, "of a monumental mentality." May we have Sir Hilary's words?
For those of us in the literary community, a question that is oftentimes asked in respect of memoirs by great men and women: what happens when the memoir has served much more than its primary individualistic purpose? What happens when the memoir is more than the organization of an individual's memories, the telling of their tale about their journey as citizens of humanity? What happens when the memoir goes beyond memory and becomes a manifesto of a community and a narrative of a nation? We have such a circumstance before us. This memoir of Sir Elliot Belgrave is far more than just the reorganization of his memories and the telling of his tale. This memoir is the vision of a native son that represents and personifies the rise of the Barbados nation. At the surface, it is the narrative of Sir Elliot Belgrave, the quintessential judge of the Barbados bench, a man who was also the jury of the journey of Barbadian people from their grassroots to the center of the British Empire, London, and back home to participate, to evolve as the Governor General for a generation. It is all of that and much more. It is also the inner story, the microism of the Belgrave clan, the famous Belgrave clan that erupted in the north of Barbados to set a standard for working class resilience and their struggle to emerge against the hegemony of the plantation structure. This Belgrave clan is a northern tribe and a very special part of that northern tribe, of the northern part of this island that stood its ground and gave us a new political and moral construct. Yes, those working families of St. Lucy, St. Peter, St. Andrew, that triangular that was built around Boscobel, the beating heart of the northern working class resilience. It is not surprising that when the Marcus Garvey branches began to emerge in Barbados in the 1930s and 40s, that Boscobel was at the center of this Garveyite sentiment. And what precisely was the Garveyite sentiment? That black people should no longer be victims of the plantocracy and the planter class, that they must pursue the ownership of property. They must pursue economic independence. They must protect their sons and daughters from the traditional dominance of that plantocracy that cared very little for the emerging people of Barbados. That they must celebrate resilience. They must insist upon the independence of their children. Take their children out of the clutches of that sugar structure. The Belgrave clan mastered that narrative. They were the symbol of that northern tribe. When the Panama Revolution erupted and young men and women went off to pursue financial resources, to return home, to purchase land, to build households, extend families upon the ownership of freehold land. Yes, that is the Northern agenda. This book tells the story of all of that. And Sir Elliot was an expression of a native son created by this sensibility. The North, centered around the Boscobel ecosystem, did produce generations of young men and women who stood their ground. They went to Panama. They went to England, as did Sir Elliot. Returned home with a profession built upon that philosophy of independence, self-help, holding your own, and standing with dignity in the face of poverty. Defeating that poverty and creating for your generation a higher standard of conduct. This is why this memoir of Sir Elliot is much more than the organizing of an individual memory. A great man with a narrative, a great man with a magnificent story. It is much more than that. It goes beyond the individual and becomes the expression of a nation arising. This independence that is built into the ethos and the ethics of Barbadians found quintessential expression there in this northern tribe, of which Sir Elliot is an elder. It's a book, therefore, that tells the story of us. It originates in the narrative of a son, but it becomes the manifesto of the nation. It is certainly one of the finest books I have ever read in respect to the making of the modern Barbados and Caribbean nation. We must also give celebratory thanks to the former principal of Coleridge and Parry, who represented an institution through which Sir Elliot passed. Alwin Adams, for his capacity to research, for his capacity to organize the data beyond the self and to pull together the relationship between the page and the passage of the people. We thank Alwin also for his contribution to this manifesto. I am doubly proud of this memoir, not simply because it is a brilliant book that helps us to understand the making of modern Barbados and the trials and the travails of the men and women who built this nation, and why citizens like Sir Elliot Belgrave represents the heart of what the Barbadian identity and struggle has been, but because I too am a Belgrave and proud to make this commentary on the contribution of the Belgrave clan and to celebrate my great cousin, my friend, Sir Elliot Belgrave, and to thank him not only for his service, but also for helping us to understand even more deeply and more profoundly from whence we have come. Thank you, Sir Elliot. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Hilary. I am sure it will not surprise you to discover, as he indicated, that he is not just a member of the tribe of Boscobel, but of the clan of the Belgraves. And so we now come to the second reading by Carol. Would you be so kind?
The second reading is taken from chapter 4, which commemorates the 1960s. It was pleasing to see more and more Barbadians participating in the social activities in and around London. The only concern came from some of our females who complained that a lot of good music was wasted at the fetes because Barbadian men tended to congregate in corners discussing cricket, leaving them stranded as wallflowers on the sides of the dance floors. To those of us who were from Barbados, cricket was like a religion. Furthermore, it was a period in which the West Indian team was in its ascendancy, and this, of course, gave us some bragging rights. I remember the thrills, the excitement, and the satisfaction when the West Indies cricket team toured England in 1963 and 1966, and on each occasion trounced England on home soil. Thousands of West Indians flocked to the grounds and livened up the spectator participation in England, especially at Lord's and the Oval, where the game was traditionally watched by gentlemen in jackets and ties. We attracted attention by our vociferous support of the team, the light-hearted barracking of underperforming players, our peculiar sense of humor, and our invasion of the pitch when centuries were scored or victories secured. Barbadians always made arrangements to be on holiday when cricket was playing. In 1966, for example, when more than half the team was from Barbados, an island of only 166 square miles, Garfield Sobers captain, Conrad Hunt, Wesley Hall, Charles Griffith, David Holford, David Allen, Peter Lashley, and Rawl Branker. When cricket was playing, As the Trinidadians used to joke and say, boy, Bajan fire the work. The story is told of a Barbadian medical student who turned up for work, only to be asked by his senior, "What are you doing here?" "Sobers and Holford are batting at Lord's." Whereupon he spun around and headed for St. John's Woods. Every Barbadian who could not attend a test match was seen on the streets or on the buses and trains with a transistor glued to his ears. We never lost an opportunity to let the English know that they might have invented the game, but lacked the skills and ability to take on our boys. The victories of our cricket team extended beyond the cricket boundary and called into question the notion of the inherent superiority of the white race over the blacks. Make no mistake about it, the English test team was made up of the brightest and best products of the elitist grammar schools and graduates from Oxford and Cambridge. Some of our boys only had an elementary school education and still were able to get the better of the Oxford and Cambridge dons. The sheer brilliance of our cricketers, their superiority in all departments of the game, mesmerized the host, and the attention of the entire nation was focused on the cricket. For the British elites and the cricket aficionados, those defeats were viewed as national disasters and they were left dejected and crestfallen. That was not surprising, because a former British Prime Minister once said that he preferred the country to lose a battleship than for the English cricket team to lose a test match. I can think of nothing that provided greater pleasure and satisfaction to West Indians living in London in the 1960s than the majestic display of cricketing heroes. I think it is fair to say that cricketers of that era understood what their victory meant to us, and they went all out to deliver. Nothing could surpass the jubilation and the exuberance of beating England at Lord's, except, of course, the second coming.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have the great pleasure of introducing someone who needs no introduction, either to sing a calypso or to give a feature address. And perhaps he will do both, because calypsos are on our mind. I have the pleasure of asking the Honourable John King, Minister of Culture, to come to the podium. Demonstrating your usefulness by climbing the height.
Mr. Master of Ceremonies, please indulge me if I break protocols a bit, because I believe that all human beings are honorable and distinguished. So let me say, good evening, all honorable and distinguished guests. Before I begin, listening to the excerpts, especially about cricket and the Barbadians, it takes me back to my childhood, my early days, being born in England and seeing firsthand what a winning West Indies team meant to my father, my uncles, and those persons with whom I lived. It also took me back to how I felt then as a youngster, as if I was in a place where I didn't belong, and then to come to Barbados, to have the complete opposite feeling, and to be able to achieve anything that I dreamed of. I want to take this opportunity to thank you all from the bottom of my heart for allowing me to be me. I thank you. There's a quiet renaissance of the literary arts in Barbados, and it is with a certain degree of pride and joy that I can say it is happening in an era where I get to experience it firsthand, sitting in the position as Minister responsible for culture. This is my third book launch in 3 weeks. But I have also received over the last 2 years close to 30 works, ranging from magazines to books of poetry, novels, both fiction and nonfiction. It tells me that the creativity of Barbadians is alive and well. The challenge, however, is to get these published works into the hands of our people at home as well as in the diaspora. By overcoming this particular challenge, we accomplished 2 major objectives. One, we create a market for our writers, which is in turn a huge incentive for them to produce on a continuous basis. 2, we can use these works as educational and entertaining tools that also play a very significant role in defining who we are as a people. The more people read, the more they are exposed to new words, ideas, and concepts that stimulate, challenge, and expand our own consciousness. When we are confronted with our own stories, our own relatable reality, no matter how good, bad, or indifferent, it is our collective truth. For it is only by confronting our truth we are able to tackle those issues that oftentimes we avoid because they make us uncomfortable. A few that readily come to mind are race, class, discrimination, and yes, hypocrisy. These 4 horsemen continue to wreak havoc on a society content to bury its head in the sand, too afraid to accept that these colonial attributes have kept us from living to our full potential as a society. Alwin Adams, through notes of a native Governor General, chronicles the life of Sir Elliot Belgrave. Though I have not been able to read the book in its entirety as yet, I am sure that given the time period, there's more than enough food for thought within the pages to challenge the most conservative among us. Already, there are excellent reviews from academics and others privileged to view the manuscript. I want to congratulate Mr. Adams, as well as to encourage those of you here to purchase at least 2 copies. One for yourself, and I'm sure the other one will make an excellent Christmas gift. I also want to thank all of you for coming out to support the arts and encourage you to become advocates as we seek to reposition the creative industry as a pillar of national development. To you, Sir Elliot, I really don't have the words to describe how I felt the very first time that I saw you as a Governor General making the effort to go out to our young people, our exceptionally young people in the primary schools. In all of my life growing up, I've always seen our Governor Generals congratulating centenarians. It was the first time that I saw someone of that stature take the opportunity to meet, greet, and to speak to what we continue to call the future generations. And I really want to salute you for that. There's one other thing that I made an observation this evening that I'm hoping that maybe It is something that we can change as we develop. 2020, and I've said this before, is related to having excellent vision. 2020. You know, in the United States of America, if there's one thing that I always marvel at, is that a president will always be referred to as president. You would never hear anyone refer to them as former president or former this. I hope that maybe, starting in this room this evening, that we will refer to Sir Elliot as Governor General. We will refer to Honorable Frondell Stewart as Prime Minister Stewart. We will refer to the past senators as Senator whoever. Because it's not everyone who gets the opportunity to serve in these capacities. And regardless of color, class, creed, political persuasion, the most important thing, and I think oftentimes we lose it, the most important thing is that every single one of us in this room has benefited from what these persons have done as Barbadians. And it's important that as we tell our stories, that we look past all the differences and try to find and zero in on those things, the common things that make us one. I challenge you, every single person in this room, I challenge you. The 2020 has exposed a lot of things that are wrong in this country, but it has also highlighted a lot of things that are good. The developments of these books, this one, and the many others that I've received, is a good thing. But it is also going to be better when we take the essence of these books, of these lives of eminent persons, their struggles, their conquests, and the things that they have left for us to build on. That is the good part. And I want you to focus on the good parts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you very much indeed. What has been striking this evening is one of the aspects of Sir Elliot's tenure, which has been so important to him, and which obviously has been important to Alwin, to Minister King, and to me. And it's the fact that he spent so much time visiting visiting primary schools. As you know, we have a couple of score centenarians every year in Barbados. In fact, we have just about the highest national figures for centenarians. Not as high as Okinawa in Japan, but Japan doesn't seem to be publishing its full national figures. So for every centenarian that Sir Belgrave visited, he had 2 or 3 primary schools to visit. And I think this is tremendously important, but I'm not sure that what he was doing has impacted on the government of Barbados. And that's why I think it's so important that the Honourable John King is here, because I know that our government and our Prime Minister does not believe that our ministry should be silos. And therefore, any influence that you can have on our Ministry of Education on the primary schools of Barbados, which have been grossly, and I really mean it, grossly neglected. Because that is where it starts, Sir Elliot, isn't it? That is where our emphasis should be. That is where we should have our best teachers with enormous skills in psychology. That is where we should be working. Because Alwin referred to that philosopher, it was Erasmus. And I found it in the book when I read it. Erasmus said that he spent time with the children because young people are the harvest field and the raw material of the nation. And therefore I make a call tonight to the nation and our emissary from the government, Minister King, to see that something is done about our primary schools. Because what people didn't realize that when we amalgamated all the boys' primary schools and the girls' primary schools into a joint primary school, we increased the numbers in each class so that the individual attention of the children was lost. And that is why 11+ children cannot pass in English or mathematics, because they lack it. But let us move on, because we really have come to the end of a very interesting, stimulating, illuminating, and entertaining afternoon. We have all, I think, learned a tremendous amount. It's been a wonderful time, Sir Elliot. It wouldn't have happened without your amazing book. And I would therefore encourage everyone, because as Sir Hilary said in his words, in his foreword, Sir Hilary suggested that the struggle continues as the Republic beckons, and he urges everyone to get hold of this rare, seismic literary contribution of Elder Sir Elliot of Boscobel, in whom we are most proud. Alwin, would you give the vote of thanks?
You have been an exceedingly good audience. In my head magisterial role, I would probably give you a day off. But of course, I no longer have that prerogative. I think I ought to start. This is not my accustomed role. You would say in cricketing terms that I'm really an opening batsman. And while I appreciate the notion of Thanksgiving, I've not been asked formally. I know I more do it in informal ways. In this particular case, though, I want to start by thanking anyone and everyone that I might inadvertently forget. And having done so, because I would probably forget most of the folks who contributed so massively this evening, and Sir Trevor and all the other contributors. And you really made the evening very, very special. I feel that I'm in good company. This vote of thanks is really an acknowledgement. This work has been going on for at least 4 years, writing and rewriting and going back to Sir Elliot, verifying this and going to his friends, etc. And so what I have written here is what I could remember. So I will read it. It is only fitting for me to publicly acknowledge of all those without whose assistance these memoirs of this remarkable Barbadian statesman would not have been possible. I owe a special debt of gratitude to my wife, Yvonne, whose patience and long suffering and sheer endurance may be equal but not surpassed. On many occasions, I had to rely on the computer skills of my son, Andre, and my granddaughter, Ayana. And my other son, a little more distant, he was a teacher. I think what he did was to make sure that I wrote the narrative in a style that appealed to Barbadians in general and to school children in particular. I really want this book to be read by school children. I want to acknowledge the work done by Martin Ramsey. I think he ought to stand and take a bow. I think Ronald Williams, obviously you referred to him, but he is a veritable repository of wisdom. And I dig deeply into his well. He's a very close friend of mine from school days. He was my go-to man because of his breadth of knowledge and his vast erudition. He read drafts, helped with research, and also critiqued and edited the manuscript. I must sing the praises, too, of Ronald Williams, who resides in the United States and is a successful author and an alumnus of the College and Parry School to boot. After reading drafts of the early drafts and the early chapters, he felt that the essence and the sensitive nature of Sir Elliot's recollections would be more impactful if I were to switch from reported speech to direct speech. And in that sense, I literally rewrote the script with the help of Mr. Ramsey. I was impressed not only by his force of intellect, but by the degree of selflessness and altruism, which was particularly praiseworthy. Frank Cadell, a contemporary of a year or so younger than Sir Elliot, Carol Morris, he's a Morris, but he's of the Belgrave clan. Other persons such as George Allen from Miami, Cedric Wiltshire, Alwin Adams, Eddie Griffith, Colin Carter. Colin Carter is a radical. I thought he might have been here this evening, but on second thoughts, I'm glad he didn't come. He would probably have interrupted the proceedings. And my family, Megan and Cecil Applewhite, and their children, Colette, and members of the Windrush generation in England, all of them were extremely supportive. I also want to offer heartfelt thanks to Dr. Patricia Saul, Megan Applewhite, Angela Ferguson. She's a friend of mine from Toronto. She calls all the time to find out how things are going. I'm not sure if she's watching the streaming of it right now, but when the ambassador goes up, I think he will have some work to do to make sure that this work is disseminated in the diaspora. Cynthia Curtin Murray, these are the College and Parry Mafia, Hedda Phillips Boyce, and a number of them are here, Janice and Myrna and all those who gave unstinting support to this work. We also had Roosevelt Broom, Christopher Sobers, Dr. Warner, he's from Bayview. He humbugged my wife all the time about when this thing is going to finish. And so I thought, I am looking forward to him buying 10 books, actually, Dr. Warner. And we have, of course, AKL Tony Marshall of Barclays fame and senator. And Trevor Carmichael, Sir Henry Fraser, a lot of other persons from the Senate. I couldn't get everybody down. I think that I would have left out a few. I also want to thank Douglas Corbin and Winston Brown and Kwame Ramsey. These were people who actually videotaped, went into Government House and had a little brandy and so on. and we videotaped Sir Elliot. And as a matter of fact, we didn't have enough time, but I was going to have shown on the screen excerpts from the videotapes that we made so that you could see the authenticity of this work. I also want to thank the Government Information Service, the media, all of them, like they remember Barbados Today, the Advocate, the Nation, and all the other persons. Of course, this publication is a true Barbadian product. Persons had introduced foreign publishers and so on, but from the time I was introduced to Miss Pitt, I said to myself, she sounds and looks like a woman I can do business with. And so I think that many things that we go abroad for can actually be done here, and particularly in the area of intellectual property. If we have the technology and so on, there's really no need. The size doesn't really matter. In fact, small is beautiful. And I want to particularly thank her for the help that she gave me and for the type of work that she did in actually producing this work. The printers, I think it's called printery, when you see the standard of work. And I don't think they're being established for a long time. So you can see that with the kind of help that should be given to them, that they could compete worldwide in the terms of production of this type. And so this institution here is called what, LESC, do we have it right? They have been magnificent. They took over everything, and although I still had some sleepless nights, they assured me that they would have everything in order. And I therefore want to thank them profusely for a work well done. I feel a little relieved that this time has come and that I can thank you for being here. I just want to indicate that the cultural industries, I've now finished with the thanking, I can't remember everybody else, but the cultural industries is in fact a sunrise industry. And I think that the artists ought to be supported, particularly by the national NCF and the business community in this country. And we would like to see what the Chinese say. We'd like to see 1,000 blossom bloom. I am an old man, but I remember I have a confession to make. When my first son came here, went to St. Giles and then to Combermere for some reason. I don't know if he went there, but he ended up there. But he wrote a lot of poems. And I really did not support him because I at the time, I felt that perhaps there was not the market and so on for it. And I want to confess that I was wrong. And I hope that he would, that interest would be rekindled and that that creative genius that is somewhere there would be rekindled. And as I said, this book is for everyone, but it is particularly for the young people. It is Sir Elliot, you may not know, is pushing 90 from the other side. In March the 31st, if my mathematics is correct, the 16th of March, he'll be 90 years old. 9 decades of experience. One of the few living statesmen that can articulate what life was like in the days before independence and so on in the early part of the century, who actually being the builder of this young independent nation. Our young people need to know about that. They need to know their history. The fact is that if you were to do a survey, you could not find 10% of the entire population of the Barbadian schools who actually do history and indeed Barbadian history. And that ought to be looked into, because it is having a deleterious impact, it is a negative impact on the society as we observe things happening at this time. And so I want to end by saying that I believe I have a book, one or two more books in me, and I would like to have this kind of support when I make another attempt. But I almost forget, you know, because in this hall are students from Elliot Belgrave Primary School. I think we ought to have them come forward. We're not going to ask you to sing the Ash Grove. You need to come up here and let us hear who you are. Take off the mask for the time being. What is your name? What is your name?
Jalea Haynes.
And young man?
Dominic Hadley.
Yes, we are very pleased. We are very pleased that you are here. Your headmistress promised that you would be here. She herself is doing duty at her church, but she said she would have one of the staff members. The staff member should come up too. We don't want. Who's the staff member? Come on. We don't want any backwoodsmen. Let people see you, because Boscobel, we could stay here for the rest of the night talking about Boscobel and what that Boscobel school has done for that district. The Anglican Church, although we criticize it, the Anglican school, although we criticize it, the Anglican school was established in Boscobel, and with it, 2 primary schools. And what you saw was this transformative power of a neighborhood school, which we should go back to, which has been destroyed by the 11+. But the neighborhood school was the bedrock of the building of this society, whether it's being St. Philip or Boscobel or anywhere else. And so I want to commend you. And I'm a poor man, but I'm going to donate 2 books to the school. Anyone have one that can? But I have one here, but I don't have the other one. Okay. But before you leave, I want to make sure that the students, and on Monday morning, this will be done at the assembly. I am a big believer in assemblies. You know, the assembly, if you want to know anything about the school, go to the assembly. So this presentation, and I want to be invited to the school so that you can see what I made up. So, yeah, great. Good. So I want to commend you, and we want to hear good things of you and keep the Boscobel flame alive. I wonder if these children know, not only Sir Elliot, you know, the product of that school is phenomenal. Phenomenal. It would take me a long time to know that. And we want that to continue. We want to see the teachers bringing these children up and catapulting them from the windswept and craggy hills of Boscobel. Success in all the fields possible. So I want to thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, and I would like to have Sir Henry back and finish off.
Okay. Okay. Well, Alwin has asked me to make sure that I come back so that I can invite everyone on the behalf of Alwin and of Sir Elliot to rejoin and have some more libations in the hallway. So please, everyone, the evening is not over. Please join Alwin and Sir Elliot for libations out there where the bar is. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a wonderful evening and drive home safely and keep your masks on as far as you can.